Hi, how's everyone going? It gives me great pleasure in welcoming you here today. The UC Series Seminar Series is proud to introduce you Dr Lynore Geia and her seminar, Time for Talking Up Loud, Aboriginal Islander Voices Shaping Australian Research. And we're actually hashtagging this, so if you want to tweet throughout the process, it's hashtag talking up. So talking, not talking. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, Dr Lynore Geia is an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander woman born and raised on Palm Island off the coast of North Queensland. Lynore is a registered nurse and has worked in and supports Aboriginal community health with extensive experience in Aboriginal women's health and birthing. Lynore is committed to developing effective research and education in nursing and midwifery that impacts on health praxis, in particular the closing the gap in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. From a personal point of view, seminar has a connection with some of the work I've recently been speaking on regarding mainstream cultural blindness to the wonderfully insightful people in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander society today. And this is great for building Indigenous research capacity. So please welcome Dr Lynore Geia.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm going to be putting my glasses on and off, so I hope that's okay. Just tells me how the years have gone when you have to put your glasses on and off. So, but thank you very much for inviting me. I just want to acknowledge the members of CERI and for inviting me down here to give this seminar. Thank you also to Melissa Sweet, who's been a connection with Canberra Uni and members of CERI, so thank you, Melissa. I also want to acknowledge Pat Anderson, who's not here today, but she has been a great mentor of mine during my early career as a nurse and a midwife in Indigenous health. So Pat, unfortunately, could not come this afternoon, but I'd just like to acknowledge her as a great mentor. I'd like to acknowledge country and people. As a child, we were always taught, particularly by my father, that when we entered into country, even when we walked on Palm Island, there were areas that, as children, we weren't allowed to walk. So he would always lead us and we'd be walking behind him. So as he went through the bush, he would call out into the spirit world, you know, old people, it's only me, Tom Geia, and my family, my children. And that's something that he's taught us all, and it's part of our protocol before we speak on country, is that this is not my country, it is Aboriginal country. It belongs to the Ngunnawal people. So I want to read a passage before I acknowledge them, just to give you a sense of what country means. This is an extract written by a man called Ken Taylor, which I think is very beautiful. Country in Aboriginal English is not only a common noun, it is a proper noun. People speak to country, sing to country, visit country, worry about country, feel sorry for country, and look for country. Country knows, hears, smells, takes notice, takes care, is sorry or happy. Because of this richness, country is home and peace, nourishment for the body, mind and spirit. It's heart's ease. So within the spirit of that, what I've just read, I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners and the custodians of the land that we are meeting on today. But I also want to acknowledge my other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters in this room and their country, and also you as friends and allies of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, academics of Canberra University. I want to acknowledge you as well and your people. The image that you have before you is a beach on Palm Island. It's my footprints and those of the children that were around me. And I put that up because for me as an Indigenous researcher, going back to Palm Island, my country, is very important. Doing research with my community is very important. and making footprints on that sand. I remember as a child when my parents made footprints, we would run and try and step into them. And metaphorically, one of my hopes is that I'm making footprints for young people of Palm Island or others to follow in the footprints that I make, because I'm following in the footprints of others. Our culture is dynamic, and I'd like to think it's sophisticated, because we have survived over 220 years, and colonisation has brought a profound change in our lives. Aboriginal culture is no longer the same as it was back then. However, we have survived and we are resilient, and we have been making footprints on this land, but within the lives of each other. And I describe the walk that we walk as a sophisticated walk, because we can walk both worlds, most of us. We can negotiate quite successfully the world of academia, the non-Indigenous world, but we can also negotiate walking in our own world. So I call that us Murrays, and I want to extend that to all Aboriginal people that do this, is that we're sophisticated, we're deadly, and that's something that we have to keep reminding ourselves about. We are sophisticated. We can walk both worlds with cultural integrity, and that's really important. Just a few cultural protocols. In the image you see, they're Palm Island kids playing on the beach. There's no single Aboriginal culture. Aboriginal society is very diverse and dynamic. I'm from Palm Island. I can't get up and talk in Yarrabah or Cherbourg, because that's not my country. I can talk in Palm Island. And what happens in Palm Island is not necessarily the same things that will be effective in Yarrabah. So we are diverse, and I think that's really important to recognise when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is that there are some shared things, but there are also very specific things that we need to think about when we're working with community. And Torres Strait Islanders are very separate people with their own distinct identity and cultural traditions. So you can't say Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and mean the same people. Particularly when you're talking about protocols and community, we're very distinct. We're very close, we are interlinked. My family is both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. My father's Torres Strait Islander, my mother's Aboriginal. And in many of our communities, we've had interrelationships and very close links and children. So yes, there's something really important to think about, and I find in my experience in academia that that's not always recognised. We've always been lumped together as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, or I've seen the acronym ATSI, which is not acceptable anymore. Excuse me while I take a drink. So one size doesn't fit all. We're distinct, we have shared experiences, but we also, when engaging with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's engaging with the specifics, the locality of where people are living as well. The other thing to mention is that we're nations within a nation. We're not one Aboriginal nation. We all have our own nations that we belong to. And it's really important, particularly for policymakers, particularly for people who want to work with people in Aboriginal community. We recognise we are nation people. We have nation mindset. We know the boundaries that we can stand and talk in, and we know the boundaries that our old people have come from. So it's important to, and I think that map is a wonderful illustration of how many nations within our own nation of Australia. And in past practices, it's always been a blanket kind of statement over Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But now Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are demanding that that's not the way to do it anymore. You work with us in our own nation area, and that's really important. I've put that image up. That's the wall of our health service on Palm Island, and it says Bulgaman, many tribes united. Many of you may know the history of Palm Island, but in the early 1920s, over 40 different tribes of people were forcibly removed from their traditional country in Queensland and far out to the west to the Northern Territory border, Western Australia, down south to the Queensland-New South Wales borders. People were removed and sent to Palm Island for various reasons. Many lived and stayed and raised their families on Palm Island. I am fifth generation Palm Island person. I was born on Palm Island, and my mother was sent there when she was 3 with her mother. The reason was she was cheeky. That was in the official records. My grandmother was a cheeky person. She answered the authorities back, so she was sent to Palm. And there are many stories like that where you hear different reasons, you know, unwarranted reasons why people were forcibly removed from their country and sent somewhere else. But we have become one people. We still have our own cultural links. I'm from the nation of Kalkadoon, Birigubba, and the Kuririg nation up in the Torres Strait. We still recognise, but I also recognise myself as a Bulgaman, which is where my parents strived and built their lives there and built their children's lives. So we're one people, but of many nations. Who am I? Before we talk about some aspects and perspectives of the research that I do, I think you need to know a little bit about me, because in Aboriginal research, we need to have relationships. That's really important and a central component of doing research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I'm just going to give you a little brief pre-say of who I am. First, I want to start with my naming, which ironically, it ties up with the title of my talk, you know, talking up loud, bringing a voice into research. Well, at my naming, my mother didn't have a voice. So when I was born, the midwives said my mother was taking too long to name me. It was my aunt's job she was given the privilege of giving me my name. But after a couple of days, the midwives decided that it was time, like I was nameless for 2 days, that was enough. So they registered me as Gladys Roberta Jean. And on all my birth certificates, there is Gladys Roberta Jean Geia. And I've never known that name in my life. And I said to my mother, Mum, how come this name is here? She said, well, I didn't name it that, it's those nurses. And, you know, she goes, white people again. That's her exact words. White people again, they're impatient, eh? And then she'd go on to a story. But that's just an example of my mother not having a voice at my birth, a very important ceremony in people's lives, you know. Later on, my aunt gave me my correct name, which is Lynore Karen. And that means pure light, which is something very significant, you know, for my family. And I don't know what Gladys Roberta Jean means. I've never taken the time to look at it. So for part of my life, I've had to write statutory declarations to say I am the same one and same person as Gladys Roberta Jean. But that's all over with now, so. But I'm a Bulgaman woman from Palm Island. I'm a mother. I have 3 sons. 1 of my own son and 2 which I've raised as our family's children. I'm a community leader, teacher, mentor, storyteller, a nurse, midwife, an academic and a researcher. My role as an academic and researcher comes after everything else, because being a mother and a community leader comes first for me, and that informs my position as an academic and a researcher. My formative influence of entering into the profession, nursing and midwifery, and also academia, is based on the social justice work of my parents and the old people of Palm Island, I call them. Many now gone, but they've left their footprints in our minds and in our hearts. and the way they live their lives is still talked about today. It's also a personal conviction of mine to work towards social and restorative justice. It's also a part of a vision of emancipation or freedom for my people, particularly for Palm Island, but for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Freedom from those oppressive things that bind us, from the hurts, the wounds, from oppressive policies. Freedom to walk this land with who we are as First Nations people. Freedom to engage with the outside world the way that brings meaning to us. And it's also about recognising the strength of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We've heard so many deficit stories that's been written about us for over 200 years. And I, for one, and I know there's many others who want to turn that story around. I want a different narrative. I want to make a different story. Because it's there, it's underlying. It's just a matter of uncovering it with the right tools, with the right people beside us. So it's recognising our strength and building into people's lives through relationships. I have a personal stance on reconciliation, and whilst the political arena is very important, I believe reconciliation also is at an individual level. It's getting to know each other. It's building relationships with each other. It's saying hello to the neighbour next door, waving to the people down the street who are a different culture to you. But it's about breaking down those individual barriers and learning about each other and bringing a sense of understanding. So, talking up loud. It's a Murri colloquialism, and basically it means raising our voice, getting heard, bringing the issues out there. But it can be said in many different ways, Hey, look, you're talking up loud there, what's wrong with her, Or, you better talk up loud for us. It depends on the way it's used. And for me, during my research study in 2006, for the 6 years that I was doing my PhD, it wasn't uncommon for me to be stopped in the local Palm Island store by people, nudging me. I hope you're talking up loud Murri way. That means you better be talking up right for us. Don't be saying what the Migglers want you to say. Migglers for us in Queensland is white people. So talking up loud has always been something that I've grown up with. And it's about bringing our voice, raising our voice in areas where our voices were never heard before. Being an academic and being recognised by my community is sometimes it's a blessing and sometimes it brings burdens. So being able to talk up loud and talk up strong with integrity, it's part of both. It's a part of expectation of community. It's a part of expectation of family. So it's about representing Bulgaman people with integrity and honouring their voices. Many will never go to places that I would be privileged to go into. So they rely on me to carry their message, carry their voice, and to speak truly from the heart about them and for them. So research is not only about numbers, it's about the story behind the statistics, and that's where our voice come into. Whilst numbers are very important, it does give us a picture of things. It's the voices, it's the stories behind the numbers that interest me, because it's those voices that you don't hear. You can see the numbers on the terrible statistics of Indigenous health, but when you go behind and start talking and hearing the voices, you get a different picture. Eurocentric methods of research has been instrumental in shaping our history and the research done in our history and the health of our history in our communities. Historically, research has been something that's been done to us and not with us. On Palm Island, research projects have come and have gone, but it's a rare event when those researchers come back and give back to the community what they found. It's a rare event when they sit down with people and say, this is the meaning of the research. This is what it's saying. Historically, traditional and Western and Eurocentric research processes has taken knowledge, but they've not given it back. They've used it. And more often than not, it's been to the contrary of our well-being, particularly of Palm Island, but I can say this for other communities as well. So it's important. Reciprocity is important to part of research process, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know if you can see that slide clearly, but first I want to talk about the impact of research that has happened on Palm Island and which still is spoken about today. That image is from the genealogy records of Norman Tyndale, who was an anthropologist that came up to the communities around Queensland. And that genealogy is my father's, Thomas. He's a 13-year-old boy. And Norman Tyndale measured his head circumference and looked at his skin colour and then gave him his identity of who he is, which was then recorded in government records. So his intellect was recorded, and he was recorded as a quarter caste. Now, I don't know what that means, because I was never raised with that language in my house. But these research processes were highly pejorative research. My father rejected any attempts of imposed pseudo-identity upon him. He remained resolute in the fact that he was a Murri man, and that's who he was, an Aboriginal and a Torres Strait Islander man. I work with a woman named Rachel Cummins. She's a community member, and she told me stories. As a young woman, she worked for DAIA then, which was the Department of Aboriginal and Islander Affairs, in the 1970s on Palm Island, and there were stock books that were kept under the desk. When people were sent to Palm Island, those stock books were brought out, and the people's names, their racial breed, and other personal information was written in the stock book. And then that informed the way people were treated. And certain privileges were granted according to the racial breed documented by the government in those stock books. Now, it's uncomfortable talking about it, I know, but it has to be spoken because this is the type of research processes that have been going on for many years, from, in those early years, and this is the type of research that is embedded in the people's minds of what, when you say the word research, this is the exact things they think about. When people voiced protest or dissent about these processes, they were punished. They were put in the watch house, bread and water. Certain privileges were taken away. Some chose to be silent, but others chose to speak out and accept the consequences of their speaking out. So as academics, as institutions of knowledge, we are facing a history like this when we want to go forward and work in Indigenous communities. There are memories there, long memories. People who are still alive that remember those things being done to them. And they're the things that we need to walk softly with, to speak softly, and to walk together with. I put these two quotes because they spoke a lot to me during my PhD journey. That a man is always a teller of stories. He lives surrounded by his own stories and those of other people. He sees everything that happens to him in terms of those stories. And Reisman, I quite attracted to Reisman's work as a qualitative research, cautions us this, as qualitative researchers, we cannot give voice, but we hear voices that can be recorded and interpreted for a wider audience. Those words spoke to me when I was working with my own community. I remember getting all set up for my first interview, semi-structured interview. And I had a group of people, my brother being one of them, and I was doing a practice run, so I brought all my questions laid out to, ask them the questions, open-ended questions so they could respond. And he looked at me and he said, "Can't we just yarn? What's all this?" And that just destroyed my whole process. So I just had to pick up all my papers, put them away. And he said, "Lynore, are you trying to be like one of them?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you just better make sure you remember where you come from. So now we're going to sit down and yarn." But I got the same information that I wanted out of the semi-structured interviews by just sitting down with them. Through our relationship, through them identifying who I am and who I was to them, it was easier than me reading the questions now. "Can you tell me about?" And it's like, no. Just talk to us. So that was a really important lesson in my early career as entering academia as an Aboriginal person, because I thought I had to only do it one way. But my family and my community smashed that down and said, "No, you do it this way, our way, and you take it in." So I'm a qualitative researcher. I've nothing against quantitative research. I think it's important as well, but qualitative research speaks to me because it's much closer to the way that we communicate, particularly narrative analysis. It is more consistent with just sitting down, talking, hearing stories, and then analysing those stories. But analysing those stories with the storyteller as well. So it's not just me saying, "This is what it is." I take it back and I say, "This is what I've found. What do you think?" And they put another layer on it. And that's also about the space, time and temporality of doing Indigenous research. I find that mixed method studies are a really important methodology to use for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, because you get both. But so far I've only just engaged with qualitative narrative analysis during my research career. The principles of Indigenous research, I think for me this is important, and for the community it's also very important. And for those in academia who are interested in working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, these are very important principles to keep in mind. Indigenous research is a global paradigm now. It's happening all over the world. It's not just pockets here and there. It's become a movement. My PhD examiner is Cree. Her name is Maggie Kobach, and she's written several books around decolonising methodologies. I've met Native Americans who are working in that area, and been in contact with people in Africa and other parts of the world that are we're all moving in the one direction. And it is about voice, particularly in countries that have been colonised, where voices have been suppressed. There is a strong movement of decolonising practice. So the principles of Indigenous research for me is about new knowledge generation. It is about decolonising. It's about examining the way that we were educated. I was told on Palm Island that I was discovered by James Cook, Captain James Cook. I found that hard to, because I'm thinking, what? Did he come to Palm Island? Did he see me, He did sail past the palms, and he had recorded it in his diary, his journal, that he saw people on the beach and that there were cabbage palms there. That's why that was named Palm Island. But throughout my schooling, my formative schooling years, I was never taught in formal education about my own people. So by the time I came to do my PhD, I had to decolonise my own mind, because I kept thinking, there was a battle in my mind about where do I fit in Western academia? I'm an Aboriginal woman, I'm a Murri woman, I'm a Bulgaman woman. How does my thought processes, connect with the paradigms that I was learning about in academia? So 6 years of PhD were many tears, anger, lots of emotions, but I was fortunate enough to have understanding, wise and very knowledgeable supervisors who walked beside me and who understood the process of decolonisation and who also understood that the importance of voice for our people. I found that throughout my career as a nurse, there were people who were there at the right time to walk beside you. And I think that's really important, to recognise that if you meet somebody, I talk to my brothers and sisters here, there might be someone who will come along, who will be that person, be there for the right time for you. Build that relationship. They might not be the same culture or skin colours, but they'll have a knowledge and an understanding that can help you. So grab a hold of that and walk with it. The other principle of Indigenous research is that breaking free, the emancipation of it. The space to develop our own epistemologies and bring our own ontology into our research arena. It's really important. I'm never going to be white, and I don't want to be white, but I want to be able to walk amongst you. I want to be able to share my knowledge, and I want to be able to know that you can honour that knowledge and take it and open doors for us. I particularly leaned on Irabina Rigney's Principles of Indigenous Research and Linda Tahui Smith, which was Resistance, which is the emancipatory processes and it honours the stories of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people's survival and resilience to the past and our continuing walk through times where we feel oppressed or where there's hardship. The process of political integrity, where Indigenous research is undertaken by Indigenous Australians. We've had many researchers come in who have not been Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders. But the tide is turning. It's now time where Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders are in academia and they need to be given the lead in research that's involving their communities, involving their people. It's about privileging the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, giving a credible voice in arenas of politics, in arenas of academia, but also comes with that voice is accountability. Like, I know that you're filming this, and this will go up somewhere, and someone who knows me will see this and they'll take that back and say, did you see what she said? Did you hear what she said? Yeah, that was right. Nah, she shouldn't have said that. There's another level of accountability that gets put upon us as Indigenous researchers. Having said that, I'm no way discounting or dismissing the foundations and the frameworks that traditional Western research paradigms have set. They're important because they've taught me much. They've taught me how to build. They've taught me how to formulate and structure. And they've got knowledge too that enriched my knowledge. But for me, it's about when you're buying a house or you're getting into the house and you think, I'm going to knock that wall down. I'm going to push those windows out and put nice bay windows in there. That's what Indigenous research is about. It's about changing the model. It's about changing the traditional paradigms that we all are familiar with in academia. It's not about dismissing it, it's about enriching it. So it's applying Rigney's principles and adding my own Bulgaman headspace or Bulgaman perspective and those of the community that I work with. So that's an image or a diagram to kind of illustrate the temporality of place and space and time. We don't think in linear perspectives. Our worldview perspective is cyclical. So particularly when you're doing interviews within the community and time means something different. Yesterday could be 2 months ago when they talk about, oh, the other day. No, that was last year. Yeah, the other day, you know. So being an Indigenous researcher, having that insider perspective, you're able to pick up on these things. And particularly in storytelling, when you look at that spiral diagram, it's about somebody starts the story, somebody else comes in and adds to it, and then it goes again and somebody else comes in and adds to it. I found that when I was doing, collecting the stories from the three living generations of Palm Island families, the story of the first generation came in, and then a family member would come in and say, remember this, then they'd add to the story. And then somebody else, you know, the story would go on, and then maybe a friend of the family would come into it and say, yeah, but this happened. So it's not just a straight line where you start with a theme and you end with a theme. There are many themes that come into it, and that's it's complex, but it's not complicated for us because that's the way our headspace understands it. So time and space, it's not the same, and I think that's important for non-Indigenous researchers when they want to go into that space, that time is not the same as you understand time, or we understand time. We have a set timeline that we need to get things done, and sometimes it doesn't happen like that in Indigenous communities. Sometimes things happen and everything gets put on hold until that particular thing's sorted out, and then you pick it up again. And that's okay. That's okay for the community because it's part of their process. One of the things that we need to work on is probably our own thinking around time and the way we do research, and understanding that it's okay to wait for a little while. We don't need to rush it. I think one of the other points I want to make is that time, space and place is also important for policy making in government. We always feel like we're at the ransom of government years, you know, which government's in power for how long. And but this goes beyond that. They're just constraints that we have learnt to work with. But that's not something that we accept. It's something, I believe that governments should still be, you know, rolling on those things that have been started instead of stopping. But there's an understanding of how we work with time and space that needs to happen within not only academia but in government circles. I want to talk a little bit about the research framework that I work in, and we all understand that we have the national standards that we work to, whether for me it's the National Health and Medical Research Council, but for others who work in a different area, it's another national body. Then we have the University Ethics Research Committee. But for me as an Indigenous researcher, and for other Indigenous researchers I know, we have another layer of research framework accountability, which is community leadership, you know, presenting to the community council or the eldership or the nominated community leader. It's about how we're going to use our voice in this process. For me, there is a level of accountability to peers and family groups in the community, and how I situate myself in all of that. The first two is fairly easy to cope with, the national standards and the Human Ethics Committee. It's the last few that get complex and complicated and get prickly, because you have to walk the right way. When I mean that, I mean you have to walk with integrity. It's about community. It's not about promoting myself as an academic or a researcher. It's about my service, what I'm giving to the community, because when that happens and when that works well, the community gives back to you. You know, they recognise you and you get promoted. And promotion by my community is much more precious and valuable to me than promotion in academia. It's what the people that I live with and I belong to think about me, rather than if I become associate professor or professor. Yeah. This is a little complex diagram. This is my own personal research stance. It's all formed through relationship. The middle dark area I call critical Murray consciousness, which is my stance that I developed in my PhD journey. I call it my own CMC, and everyone has a little giggle about that, because at the time the CMC was investigating some issues on Palm Island when this was developed in my head. I woke up one morning laughing out loud and I thought, CMC, that's it. It's critical Murray consciousness. It's not the Crime and Misconduct Commission. But it's informed by critical theory, and particularly critical race theory from America, from the African American stance. It's informed by Rigney's Indigenous epistemology. Also, growing up as a Bulgaman person. And it's also informed by a process called Dari, which was developed by Dr. Miriam Angmar-Bowman in the Daly River region. And Dari is about listening, deep listening. Not with your ears, but with your spirit, listening to the words that are unspoken behind the words that are being said to you. It's about looking through with spiritual eyes rather than with the natural eyes as well, and listening. And that takes relationship to work. The identity of the researcher, like for me, I am considered an insider. Rather than an outsider researcher, I have an insider perspective. It's informed by my lived experience, the belief systems of the people that I'm working with, our worldview perspectives, the politics that's happening in our lives, the empowerment or the disempowerment of our voices, our community vision and aspirations. But more importantly, it's about a meaning, bringing meaning to the process. It's not just about me sitting down and saying, Auntie, tell me your story. It's about, Auntie, what are those things in your story that you want to bring out to change things? And that's doing it Murray way. And it can take time. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of physical, emotional and spiritual energy. I mean, there were some days that I would just, after doing a recording, a story, I'd just go back and cry in my room at JCU, because I understood. I could see the pain and I could see them trying to bring it out. And it was important. It was important for them to tell their story because they've been voiceless for many generations. The values and ethics of researching with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are about reciprocity. And it's not just taking back the findings and reporting them back. It's about exploring, talking to the people, exploring the next process out of those findings. What do they want to do? How do they see this as connecting to their lives or their world? It's about respectful research relationships. It's not only about me as a Bulgaman woman going into Palm Island doing research, but when I work with non-Indigenous colleagues, it's about respectful relationships that they build. Because if people feel unsafe and they feel that they haven't been respected, it's not the Indigenous colleague that will hear about it, it's me. Because the accountability comes back to me because I've brought those people in. It's about equality, the right to be different, distributive fairness and justice. It's about responsibility to do no harm, and transparent accountability. You know, what are you writing? What are you saying about me? It's about me bringing the process back and saying, this is what I've written, what do you think of this? It's about continuously validating. When I finished the family stories, I brought them back to the storyteller, and they read their stories. They had their children read their stories. So it was like a family validation of the data that I collected, and everybody was happy. I interviewed 5 family members, elders. 3 of those storytellers died shortly after I took the stories back to them. And for me, I was very happy that I was able to do that, because they were able to read what I'd written about them. They were happy that their family knew their story was out there. And they all thanked me. They knew they were dying, but they thanked me for the opportunity for bringing back what we call the research data back to them, so that they would look at it and validate it and basically give their blessing over it for me to use it. So it's about the importance of collective identity, survival and protection, and the spirit and integrity. About community decision making. For me, it was family decision making. Everybody saw those stories, they all read it. And we sat around the table and they passed it around. And this was my research data that was being passed around. It was something completely different to what I was taught happens in research. And everybody commented on it. And they validated it. They said, yep, that's right, good. And I got the tick. So that empowered me to go back and write it up. Because it was always based on respectful relationships. So talking up loud is also about listening. When we say talking up loud, you get the connotations of voices and noise, but it's also about sitting and listening. Listening with the ears as well as listening with your spirit. It's about not being gammon. One of the things you'll quickly find out when you work with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people is that they have a sharp discernment of character. They can pick it a mile, they can meet you and say, no, you gammon that fellow, we're not going to listen to him. Or they'll say, no, we gammon listen to him, we know you don't mean anything, well, we just sit there, please him, And that's what happens. But when they see integrity and genuineness, they'll engage with you and say, yeah, he's all right, this fellow. We know where he's coming from. We can see it. And it's not about not being a binagari, which means deaf, which is a common term that's always said about government workers. They're binagari. They're all deaf to us all the time, deaf ears. It's about listening and truly listening with integrity. And through relationship and hearing the voice in the silence, because silence can speak louder than words in our place. Hey, what's the matter? No, I know what's happened. That's why you're quiet. They're things, and they know what's going on. So some of the research outcomes that I personally would like to see is that the research is meaningful. The outcomes bring change. Leadership and knowledge. It's about knowledge transfer, but integrity within that knowledge transfer, and building community, building on our strengths and not pointing out our weaknesses all the time. For academia, it's recognising and accepting Indigenous research as scholarly research. It's about research knowledge and not knowledge generation and knowledge transfer, ethical integrity, advocacy and social justice within academia. Many academics I know have powerful positions. We need powerful allies. We need powerful friends to walk with us and to advocate on our behalf as well. It's about research, education and enrichment in diversity, recognising that we're not here in competition, we're here to partner and to enrich already research paradigms that are out there. For policy, it's about decolonising policy. working with community, the accountability of government workers to community, not imposing on community. And I've added another one there that's not written there. It's about opening doors. That's what research means to me, about opening doors for better services, for better and inclusive practice in community and policy development. I want to end this seminar with the last few slides of some recommendations from my own PhD thesis. And one of them is the establishment of a designated space and research centres for Indigenous epistemology, and a formal representation to major funding bodies that this is a legitimate, significant and essential approach to answer long-standing and traditionally ignored Indigenous research questions. It's about inclusion of principles of the proposed radical new paradigms that are developed by Indigenous researchers in both theory and practice. It's about educating all professionals involved in service delivery to Australian Indigenous people. It's about supporting existing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research organisations that are developing within our nation. Organisations like the Lowacha Institute, like the Posh Centres, Nirikan, and also organisations like IATSIS, who hold valuable knowledge that is still very precious to the community. It's about supporting those structures that really, when you support these structures, you're actually supporting the nation of Australia. It's not about being separatists, it's about including us. We're First Nations people. We're here. We're not going away, we're increasing. But we can enrich your lives if you let us in and open your understanding to the way that we work as well. And I think the take-home message that I would say is decolonise your thinking, your research processes, your practice and your policy. Listen, respect, privilege Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices and work with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynore, for your amazing talk. Being a Brisbane girl, born and bred, I really connect with the Murray, and being an early beginning Indigenous researcher, it's just wonderful to hear other Indigenous people talking about building this capacity and working alongside other people and bringing people with us.